See, all right. So it looks like it's 7, so we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm a PhD student at the University of Albany, and I'm also an executive committee member for Women in Neuroscience, or WIN. Welcome to our first Ask Me Anything panel. I know I'm really excited to hear from our panelists, so I hope that you guys are too. But before we get started, I just want to let you all know that this event is being recorded, and then that recording will be available on our YouTube page in the next coming days. I would also like just to take a minute to start with a quick breathing exercise before we get to our panelists, just to let go of some of the stress that we've been accumulating throughout the day. I know that Wednesdays are always a little rough. If you don't want to, or if you feel like you'd feel more comfortable turning your cameras off, by all means, that's more than fine. But for those of you that would like to join, I just want to take a few seconds to take some deep breaths. So I figured that we could inhale for 4 seconds and then exhale for 6. So if you guys want to breathe in with me, we can inhale and then exhale for 6. And hopefully that made you feel a little more calm and grounded. And now we can jump right into the AMA. For those of you who are new to WIN, our founder, Rose Guzman, started this group, and with the help of the rest of us in the executive committee of WIN, we worked really hard the past couple of months to launch Women in Neuroscience. And our mission is to provide a community for women to seek guidance, mentorship, support, and encouragement that's tailored to each stage. So from high school, community college, undergrad, graduate, postdoc, faculty, to anyone who's simply interested in learning about neuroscience. So without further ado, let's have our panelists introduce themselves. So how about we go in the order of Ashley, and then Kimberly, Natalie, and Sweta. And if you wouldn't mind, Ashley, if you could start us off.
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to be here. So like she said, my name is Ashley. I'm currently a second-year PhD student at the Binghamton University in New York. I had to remember to say that because I realized we're talking to people all across the nation at the moment. So I'm in New York. I am in Dr. Chris Bishop's lab, who studies Parkinson's disease. So I work with an animal model that resembles a lot of the symptoms that Parkinson's patients deal with. What else should I add? Is that good or good? Okay.
Awesome. So I guess I'll go next. My name is Kimberly. I am a first-year experimental pathology PhD student at the University of Iowa in Iowa City, Iowa. I'm actually in my 3rd year of grad school. I received my master's in pathology this summer. And then I jumped straight into my PhD, and I work in the lab of Dr. Marco Hefty. We study tau in neurodevelopment and look at the normal function of the protein, which plays also a role in disease, usually like Alzheimer's disease, but there are other tauopathies where tau plays a major role. And I'm really excited to be sharing with you my experience today. I struggled a lot in undergrad with mental health, which really affected my confidence in my applications when I was applying for graduate school. So looking back, I really wish I'd had someone to talk to. So I'm excited to kind of share my experience having gone both for a master's degree and now for a PhD with all of you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie. I'm a PhD candidate at UAlbany in New York. And so I feel like my introduction is maybe a little bit longer. Christina, is that okay if I share a little bit about like there are hurdles I had and the things yeah.
By all means.
I'm nervous because I went a bit longer. I just want to say that I got to be here as a PhD candidate because I was always interested in psychology, even when I was little. So I knew entering college, I wanted to do something with that. I grew up in a multicultural household. My father was from Russia, grew up in Poland. My mom is from Mexico. So those cultures are very different. And so that really got me interested in why people think and act the way they do. And so when I got to college, I was taking psychology classes, and I took neuroscience classes. And I thought that was a really cool perspective to have, that something that I thought of as really abstract, like personality and, the way we react to things, that can have a more concrete and tangible neurobiological basis. So I thought it was kind of really cool to marry the two, to marry that behavior and neuroscience. And a unique hurdle that I had that got me here was, I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, and they are a very high control Christian religion. So I did the whole door-to-door preaching work, the whole bit. The thing is that the witnesses are very much against higher education. And so, to be clear, I'm not saying that religion as a whole is incompatible with school and higher learning. It's just that specifically my experience in a high control group, it was not compatible. And some people learned I was, going to college and wanted to get a PhD. They were like, why are you doing that? Armageddon's coming. The world is ending. Philosophy is a man-made concept influenced by, spirits, and higher education promotes materialism, bad association. It shows that you have a lack of faith in God that he cannot provide for you. The list goes on. So this is very much like if there ever were like an environment that was not suitable for pursuing higher education, it was this. And so in pursuing college and getting a PhD, it kind of went against everything I had grown up with. And so I think the real reason that they're against higher education is because when you go and take the classes, it very much contradicts their teachings, the witnesses' teachings. And so that caused me to leave the organization. And so that was a very difficult thing to do. There is no in between with the witnesses. It's either in or you're out. And so, suddenly everything I had learned in my life, from infancy to adulthood was wrong. And I had to make the decision to leave. And so that was, difficult, having to leave everything I've ever known. But I'm happy to say that I think I've definitely made the right choice, and I'm happy with where I am and what I'm doing. And, I have great friends, the fellow WIN members, and I'm definitely happy with where I am and the choice that I made in leaving. And so lastly, I wanted to be a part of this panel because in my experience as an undergrad working in different research labs, seeing people go through the process of applying to grad school and now mentoring undergrad through the process, I see this sense of, oh my God, I can't do it. I don't have the research experience. I don't have the GPA. I'm applying too late. And that's just not the case. The specific mold or criteria to get into grad school does not exist. There is always a way to tell your story and make yourself a competitive candidate. GPA, research experience, test scores are nice, but who you are as a person is much more important. And so that key is being able to convey that in your application. So basically, I just want to make sure that anyone who is applying to grad school, you are able to do so. It is for everybody.
That was awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Sweta. I don't have a huge intro, but I'm a MD PhD student at Oregon Health and Science University. So I finished 2 years of med school. I'm in my grad school phase right now. I don't know what year I am because it's been a while. And then eventually I'll go back to med school and finish this whole shindig. Currently, I'm in John Williams's lab studying chronic opioid use and how that affects neurocircuitry and also tolerance to opioids. I guess a unique hurdle that I've faced getting into grad school would be I'm an immigrant and a first generation. So that comes with its own unique challenges in terms of not quite knowing how to apply, who to talk to, how to write applications. And I guess that was part of the reason why I wanted to be in this panel, was just to kind of make sure everybody knew that everybody has access to higher education and doctorate degrees, and it's not just for certain people and people from certain backgrounds. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here and ask any questions you may have.
Okay, awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing all of that. We're going to move on now to, I think, what we've all been waiting for, the Q&A. So first, we're going to have our panelists answer about 10 questions from the registration submission. So thank you, everyone, for submitting those questions. And then we're going to address any spur of the moment questions people might have. So that being said, the chat is open. So if you want to start submitting questions, you can, but you can also wait to see if your question is already answered. And we'll try to get through as many as we can, but we are going to try to cut off around I think 7:55 or so, just so we have time to wrap up and people can go on about their night. Okay. So and I should also say, for the panelists, you are welcome to answer any questions, all questions. You can abstain if you don't have anything particular to contribute. Totally up to you. So our first question is, how do I stand out as an applicant for graduate school? How do I make my personal statement stand out?
If I can start, I'll start us off. I was just going to say, I think in mentoring undergrads now, it's a lot easier mentoring people from the other side. I was just going to say, think about why you're applying. Everyone is going to say, I'm really passionate about the science. I think it's really interesting. Everyone's going to say that. What is it about your specific experience that led you to where you are? I think that creates an interesting story. So like, why are you interested in this? What is it that makes you passionate? What excites you about neuroscience, and what is it about the experimental process that really engages you? I think that helps set people apart.
I completely agree. It's a personal statement, so it has to be personal, right? So you can't just, I think, talk about, well, I had this experience and that led me to this. Like, I think a lot of people want to read about who you are as a person and why they should interview you. And I think Natalie mentioned there's not a mold that you have to fit to get into grad school. So the more you bring to your application, the better it is. So as scary as it is to be vulnerable, I think like showing that vulnerability actually is a huge asset when you talk about what you talk about in your personal statement.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, one of the really important parts of a personal statement, I think, is being able to address things that you might see as weaknesses. For me, my grades suffered a lot because of my mental health in undergrad. And so I really felt that the personal statement was a good opportunity for me to kind of explain my situation, but also to reiterate that the past didn't define me and that I could still be a successful student, even though I had had these challenges because of what I had learned from it. So I think that a lot of people's tendency is to shy away from talking about the negative in their personal statement, but I think it's a perfect opportunity before they even meet you and interview you to kind of upfront say, I know you're going to see X or Y in my application, but here's kind of my perspective on it. Here's what I learned, and here's why I think I'm still a strong applicant regardless of this experience.
All right, we can move on to the next question. How do I go about picking an advisor?
I could start this one out. So I started probably the summer of my senior year, going into my senior year, and I really just narrowed down, what my interests were. The first thing I really did actually was find the area that I wanted to stay in, not just like subject-wise, but also your location in whatever state you're in. If you want to stay on the East Coast, if you want to stay on the West Coast, if that's important to you, that's something that I considered when I was applying. Also, when you actually, fine-tune your choices that you have listed for PIs, always reach out to them before applying to the program that you're applying to, because a lot of the time they may not actually be accepting students. So that's an important factor. But you also definitely want to have some type of interest in whatever work that they do, because if you end up getting accepted and if you end up going into a lab that you're not sure that you're going to enjoy, it'll be a little difficult in the beginning. Or for the whole time. But that's pretty much like the overview that I had. I don't know if anyone else has anything else to add.
I think definitely reaching out to potential advisors is important. I think one of the most important lessons I've learned in going into research labs and having different experiences with different kinds of people who you're working with and working for makes a huge difference on your outlook. You know, sometimes graduate school has its ups and downs, and you want to have an advisor who is, you know, there for you. And so if you're able to, like Ashley was saying, you know, either meet your potential PI or email them or what have you, and see if you guys click or not, I think that makes a big difference. Because there's definitely a social aspect to graduate school. And similarly, if you meet other graduate students in the program, see if they're in the lab, are they happy in the lab, or is there kind of like this weird awkward silence when you bring up that professor? It's, you know, if that person doesn't, you know, inspire you, or they're not very pleasant, it may not be a good idea to enter that lab, because again, lab dynamics are super important. Your research could be super, super interesting, but if you don't get along, then it's, you know, it makes it all the more difficult. So definitely reach out and see if you're compatible with this person.
Definitely agree with everything that's been said. Yeah, reaching out to advisors, talking to people that are already in the lab is a huge thing I think that you should do. I mean, most graduate students like don't lie to you, because I mean, there's no reason for us to lie to you. We don't get paid enough. But I think another thing to keep in mind is like a mentor for one person or a good mentor for one person is not going to be a good mentor for you, right? So even though somebody may have like a really good track record, try to find a little bit more about them and their personality, because you may not be able to handle whatever it is that lab dynamics is. And another thing, picking advisor is super important, but also look at the postdocs and senior grad students in the lab, because more than likely they are going to be the ones that's going to be training you in specific things, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be the ones that you go to ask for like little technical help and things like that. So also keep that in mind when you're making that decision.
Okay, I just wanted to let you guys know we're actually gonna get rid of this picture, even though it's lovely with all of your beautiful faces, just so we can all see each other talking, and it's a little easier maybe for the panelists to see each other unmuting. And the next question is, how did you go about selecting which universities to apply to?
I can kind of start us off here. So I have a little bit of a unique experience or take on this situation, because I went for my master's first. Part of what my criteria was looking to see if there was going to be a possibility for me to transition into a PhD program. Should I choose to go that way? At the point when I started my master's degree, I wasn't sure if that was something I was going to be able to handle with the rigor of graduate school. I had a lot of misconceptions that a master's degree was quote unquote easier than a PhD. Spoiler alert, it's not. It is the same. You take the same classes, you do the same research, it's just shorter. But it does tell you if that's really what you want to do. If you can handle 2 years and you love it, 5 years is going to be awesome. If you hate it in 2 years, you're not going to love another 4 years in it for a PhD. So for me, that was a really big criteria. I know most PhD programs are funded, but looking at how much they pay you and what it costs to live where you want to be is a huge thing, because it sounds really great if they pay you, $40,000 a year, but if it costs you $60,000 a year to live there, it's not enough. So I think that's a really important thing to consider is what you're going to make and the experience you're going to get fit exactly, what they're paying you. And I know we all know PhD students are underpaid, but make sure that you can live where you want to be.
I just wanted to be close to family was important for me. So I stayed about 3.5 hours from my family. I'm from Long Island originally, and that kind of segues into how we were just saying, and go where you would be happy living. So I'm from Long Island. I'm used to just hopping on a train and just going into the city for a day or anything like that. But then I came up to Albany, and at first I was like, this is the capital city. But I got to learn about the beauty of Albany and all that there actually is here, and that I really do enjoy. I live downtown. I'm able to walk places. There's lots of cafes and restaurants opening. And if I want to get out, I can drive 20, 30 minutes to, nature and go swimming or hiking or what have you. So there's a lot of, diversity and where I can go in Albany. So that makes me happy. I know I would not be happy out in the middle of nowhere, where everything, is closed by 6 p.m. or what have you. But if you're someone who kind of likes that, go for it. If you don't like a cityscape, don't go there. So that's something to consider because you're going to be living there for a while. It's kind of like a long-term commitment. You want to make sure that your living situation is happy.
I think another thing to consider when picking grad school and also kind of like picking the advisor is that make sure you go to a place where you see yourself working with a few different people and not just like one advisor, because funding situation changes constantly and the advisor may not be a good fit. So when you're looking at different schools, make sure there's at least like few people that their research kind of aligns with what you want to do.
Excellent. Next question. What are some tips on how to find the right topic to research when there are so many interesting ones to choose from?
I think the best piece of advice I've ever received in grad school is that you have to pick something that interests you, but at the end of the day, you have to go where the money is. And I know that sounds really horrible, but it's true. I know there are a lot of really rare diseases that are important to study, but your PhD is 5 to 6 years. That's a long time to be funded. And if you're researching something and the funding dries up and then you have to start a new project, that's horrible. So you want to be interested and engaged in the topic, but you also have to recognize that there are some things that are just going to get more funding than others. And I think that's an important thing to consider when you're looking at topics. And I also think that when I started in my lab, I was very interested in neurodegenerative disease. I really wanted to do like Alzheimer's research, Parkinson's, all that kind of stuff. And my mentor does fetal development. So he does neurodevelopment, which is completely different. And so I didn't think I was going to like it because I was really, really set that I was going to do one specific thing. And now I've been here 2 years. I did a master's. Now I'm starting a PhD and I love what I do. So, a topic may not sound like the most exciting thing. You might have things that are higher on your list, but you might actually start in there and find out it's a really good fit for you. So I wouldn't, turn topics away just because at first glance, it may not seem like the best fit. You have to give things time. But if something outright, you're like, this sounds so boring, I couldn't do this for 6 years, don't pursue that.
I think that's solid advice. Go where the money is. It's true because funding is a major thing in grad school. I was going to say it depends on where you're at in the application process. So if you're still an undergrad, maybe try out some labs if you have the time. So I started in research as a freshman, so I got a little bit of a taste for what it was to be in like working in a lab with an EEG or epigenetics or rodent stress models and cocaine addiction in rodents and all these different kinds of topics. And I was able to kind of weed through like, okay, I like this part, I don't like that part. If you have the time, if you have the availability, you can try out different labs and see what you like or what you don't like, because something might be really cool on paper. You learn something in class and then you realize, oh, wait, no, the research is, no, I'm not doing that. What goes into having to come to that one really cool result of that one really cool idea. Getting your hands dirty is one way to learn whether you love it, hate it, or something in between. So hands-on experience is also really important if you're able to swing it.
I think also kind of approaching grad school as like it's a training phase, right? Like it's not what you study in grad school is probably not going to be what you study eventually if you decide to be a PI, or if you want to go into pharmaceutical industry or whatever it is that you want to do. I've always approached grad school as like a place to gain all these skills that I'm going to need to be successful in whatever whatever my career is going to look like in the future. So if you kind of think about it that way, it will also help you narrow down what you want to do, how you want to spend the 3 to 5 years of your life doing. And also, most grad school, you will do lab rotations. So I highly suggest doing lab rotations in techniques or places or fields that you never even think about you would do, because you never know what you're going to like and what you're not going to like. So just keep an open mind.
I think it also kind of goes back to meeting with the advisor that you're potentially going to be working with when you're choosing a topic, because I remember going through interview process and on paper, some of these labs sounded super interesting and the topics were like, wow, this is really cool. And then I would meet with the advisor and it would be really terrible 30-minute conversation. And so that really like set me off too with the topics, but that might not really align with this question, but it's just another thought that I definitely came across when I was going through the application process and interview process.
I think that's a great point, Ashley, because yes, the topic matters, but like you said, if it's not a good fit, then it doesn't matter. So don't push yourself towards a topic, I think is like a good rule. I don't know why I'm answering. I'm not part of this, but okay, the next question is kind of an easy one, but I wanted to include it because I think it's important to talk about. When, if ever, is it too late to pursue graduate studies?
Okay, I've been dying to talk about this question. When I got the list of questions, I was dying to address this. So I was in a sorority in college as an undergrad. In my senior year, we actually had someone join who was an older woman who decided to go back to school in, her later stages of life and pursue a PhD. And she was phenomenal. I mean, she was just such an inspiration. She was passionate about it. And she was like, I want to learn more, so I'm going to go do a PhD. So there is absolutely no time that's too late to go back to graduate school. If you're passionate and you want to learn something, go for it. Like, there's never too late.
Yeah, definitely never too late. There is no age limit on the application. They're not going to say like, never mind you. I think the only thing to keep in mind is what is best for you. Again, you're not doing this PhD for anyone else, so your age doesn't matter. Maybe the only thing that you might want to keep in mind is I think more and more people are taking gap years in between undergrad and graduate school. So I think there's this mindset of like, I've been out of the game for too long. I don't know if I should go back. And it's like, this is kind of the norm now. I think even in our cohort, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I think a lot of us took at least 1 year in between undergrad and graduate school. I took a year. I kind of wish I did more. And honestly, that's something I would advise more people to do, is like, take more time. Like the grad school is not really going anywhere. Like, we're still working through a pandemic, but the the institutions will still be there. There's still time to apply whenever you feel that you're ready. It's not about, again, there is no specific mold. There's nothing you have to fit into. It's all about what is best for you.
All right. For someone who is in a psychology major in undergrad, what would you recommend to do if they want to pursue a PhD in neuroscience? And I know, Natalie, you mentioned marrying your psychology studies with neuroscience. Would you like to comment on this question?
Yeah, for me, I was going to go straight like clinical route and be a clinical psychologist. Then, I found neuroscience, like, oh, it's really cool. So I think it just starts with taking like the intro. I don't know what they're called these days. In my day, it was called biopsychology. These days, I think it's called integrative neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience, etc. Usually you just take one class with that and see if that works for you. You can also be a biology minor. It depends on the institution you're in. So I did a psychology major with a biology minor. And so a lot of my classes were neuroscience based, neurobiology based. There are some institutions that have a neuroscience major specifically or neuroscience minor. I think just the way to get into it is take that first class and see how that goes. There's always a way to, pull that thread, talk to the professors, talk to your TAs about how can you marry your interests, because that's kind of the beauty of the different departments between, like sociology, psychology, and neuroscience. You can look at the same problem, but it just depends on your perspective, right? There's ultimately going to be a neurobiological basis for whatever topic you're interested in. It's just a matter of, does the neuroscience perspective interest you? So just take the class, read the textbook, or what have you.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here too about this. I actually have a bachelor's degree in neuroscience and psychology. So I started out kind of in that area. Really had more of an interest in neuroscience, but was already kind of into the psychology at that point. So I went with both. But, then I interned in a neuropathology lab when I was an undergrad and realized that I really had a love for this disease process, but didn't want to lose that neuroscience aspect. So I don't think just because, you have a degree in psychology, you can't still study neuroscience, or like I'm getting my PhD in pathology, but I work in a neuropathology lab, so I'm still studying neuroscience. There's no like hard and fast rule that just because your degree is in one thing, you can't study anything else. And I think a lot of people kind of have that mindset, like, oh, if I want to study neuroscience, I have to get a neuroscience PhD. And that's just not true. You can get a degree in whatever interests you and still have a passion for neuroscience, still study that. You just have to find a program that fits you and make sure that kind of everything aligns. But there's definitely nothing that says you can't still be passionate and study neuroscience just because your degree is in psychology.
Does anybody want to add anything else? Okay. So the next question, I think Kim would probably have something to say, but then everybody else can also chime in terms of why you chose to go the other route. But someone wanted to know, I want to do a PhD in neuroscience, but I'm not sure if I should do a master's in neuroscience first or go straight to a PhD.
This is a really, really tough question to answer. And I think a lot of people ask me my opinion because I have a master's degree, but I think, as I've touched on before, it was really a personal decision. I had not the greatest GPA, and when I was talking to graduate schools about joining a PhD program, a lot of them said I just simply wouldn't make the cut because of my GPA, even though I had worked in a research lab for 3 years. I had done 3 internships. I had a lot of experience, but they didn't like my GPA. So I decided that I would do a master's degree to make sure that I could handle the rigor of graduate school. I was concerned about my mental health. Graduate school is very hard. No one can sugarcoat that. It's challenging. And I was worried that I wouldn't be able to handle the rigor. I also had touched on this earlier, but I was under the misconception that a master's degree would be easier than a PhD. And it wasn't. So I think for my own personal perspective, getting a master's degree was the right decision for me. I gained confidence, I gained skills, and I really kind of felt like that helped me solidify that getting a PhD was the right path for me. But if you are confident that you really do want to pursue a PhD and you have some experience, you did well, even if you didn't do well, but if you feel like it's the right path for you, there's nothing to say you can't pursue a PhD right away. I don't want to say there's no real reason to get a master's degree first, because it really just depends on your interest. You could get a master's in one thing and then a PhD in something else. I think ultimately you just have to decide what's the right path for you and how long do you want to be in school for.
I think, again, it depends on what your personal interests are. What if you have an end goal, if you have a particular career or job you have in mind, you can base it off that. If you know for sure, like, I want to be a professor, I want to be in academia, I want to have my own lab. If you're like really gung-ho about that, a PhD program is going to get you there. You don't necessarily need a master's. Or sometimes, I think even in our program at UAlbany, you can get a master's degree along the way of getting your PhD. That's a choice you can make. I think it was Kimberly who said it before. The master's gives you an opportunity. It's like do I like what I'm doing for 2 years? And if I like that, maybe I can keep going. There's also the financial aspect. Again, going into the cost of living in places. In Albany, Albany's relatively affordable. If you go up to Buffalo, we have a friend, I think he was saying like grad students buy houses in Buffalo. It's like, what? That's insane to me, you know? And so again, if you can go into a place where you'll be financially okay, even with a graduate stipend, that works. Maybe you don't necessarily have to go through the master's program, because again, a master's program, usually you're paying out of pocket. So there's a lot of things to take into account, but it's a matter of being honest with yourself and your goals. What is realistic versus what not realistic? For me, I went from undergrad, took a year off, and then went for a PhD. And in that gap year, I was able to learn more about animal research, because that was a major question for me, because I had a bad experience with my first animal research laboratory. I worked with someone that did a rapid decap in front of me, like did not warn me, did not say like, hey, are you okay with this? Yeah, it was horrible. So when that happened, I was like, I'm never doing it.
What's a rapid decap?
A rapid decap is, if you work in animal research, it's when you decapitate or remove the head of an animal with a guillotine. So it's a quick procedure. So it's considered humane because the animal doesn't feel anything, because it's, again, rapid. There is no processing or suffering necessarily. But I had asked the person I was working with, like, hey, I'm coming into this lab. I don't know if you guys do animal research only. I also saw you have papers that are published in humans. I want to know what I'm getting myself into. Will I be working with humans or rats? And no one got back to me. And I'm like day 3 in the lab. They were like, all right, we're doing this. And I was just like, what? What is happening? So that was not a great experience. So in that gap year, I was able to learn more about animal research with people who were perhaps a bit more considerate. And so I learned that, okay, I can do this. I can be working in animal research, because animal research allows me to get more into the neuroscience, the molecular level, the cellular level that maybe that you don't really get in human research, at least from my perspective. And so that's something I could have also learned in a master's, but for me, it wasn't necessary, because I was able to take that gap year because of my own personal situation. I could live at home, take this gap year and work in a lab and learn more about what is it that I like or don't like. Is this something I can pursue in a PhD?
That's something I just wanted to add that I didn't recommend, or that I didn't touch on before. Most master's programs are not funded. They are expensive. So if you are going to consider that, you need to take that into account, that you are probably going to have to pay for it on your own and also pay your living expenses. I was very fortunate. I went to a fully funded program, but that is extremely rare. So that's something to consider. Most PhD programs are funded, but most master's programs are not.
Moving on to the next question. When is the best time to take the GRE? How many times can you take it? And what are some resources that you can use to prepare for the GRE?
So I can touch on this one. I took my GRE October of my senior year, and I don't know if that's actually too late, but it was the perfect time for me because most applications when I was applying were due December 1st. So that was enough time to get scores in. To prepare, I personally just used, I don't know, I can't remember if Princeton Review like has a textbook for it. I basically just did that and a ton of practice GRE questions and full length tests. But I know that a lot of schools are kind of shying away from GRE. I know Binghamton University in New York no longer requires it after I applied and everything. So, but that's fine. But for everyone else, some schools won't require it anymore. And that's something I think that you should definitely inquire about and ask whoever you're speaking to when you're applying, because if you can get out of taking it, I'd highly suggest not having to take it, because it stinks to sit through an exam like that. But yeah.
Anybody else have anything to say? No? Okay. Okay, the next question is, we've already talked about this quite a lot. I don't know, I think it's important to address again. What is a good amount of time to take off if you do take time off between undergrad and grad school?
Well, I don't know if there's like a good amount of time, but like people touched upon, a lot of people now take time off. I took 2 years off and worked at the at NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse, the NIH Postback Program. And if you guys don't know about that program, I highly recommend you look it up. It's fantastic. You get to work at the NIH with one PI. It's highly productive. It looks really good on your application because you have that NIH stamp on it. So if you are thinking about taking time off and thinking about doing some sort of a research year or a couple years, I highly recommend it. It's like a portal that you apply through, but with like anything else, if there's a lab or a PI you're interested in, email them and say, hey, I've applied to the postback program. And then that's kind of how you get in, because they will know who you are. And the reason why I took time off was because I could not even comprehend graduating and also taking the MCAT and all of these things my senior year of undergrad, because like by the second semester, even first semester of senior year, I was checked out. There was nothing, no neurons were firing anymore. So it was just not going to happen. So I took some time off, and I took like the first year to kind of just get my feet wet, and then in the research, kind of understand what I wanted. And then took also that time to study for MCAT or GRE or whatever it is whatever standardized test you need to take to get into these programs.
I think I'm maybe unique here. I might be the only one on the panel. I did not take any time off after I graduated. I went straight from undergrad to my master's and straight from my master's to my PhD. 10 out of 10 recommend taking time off. The burnout is real. This is my last semester of classes and I am checked out. I'm done. The burnout is real. So if you can afford it, if you have some plan or you have something in place where you can take a year off, your brain needs the rest. Absolutely. I guarantee you it's probably worth it. I know the other panelists can probably tell you it's worth it, but from someone who didn't take it, I wish I had.
So I actually graduated early from UAlbany, and I had a weird 8 months of possibly trying to find a tech position to get some more experience before starting my PhD at Binghamton. And honestly, I think that time off of not being in school was good and a refresher. I came back and I just felt okay, the burnout wasn't real anymore, because senior year I loaded up with a ton of classes, and I think that break was definitely needed. So I would suggest it if you can do it, but if you're ambitious, go for it.
Does anyone else have anything to add? No? Great. Next question. What aspects of a research lab are most important to consider when deciding which you're interested in or want to get involved in, i.e. overall topic of research, specifics of individual projects, methods, the people you're working with, etc.?
People. It's 10 out of 10 for me. It's the people. I think most of the projects that I've started have failed because that's just science and that's just life. But the fact that I've been surrounded with really great lab mates and a really good advisor who sees the humor in that and is very supportive, gives me the independence to just kind of mess around and figure things out. But at the same time, if I veer too far off the course, it's okay, no, come back, you need to focus, like that. People over anything, everything, all the things, people and community. Grad school's long. You need that. You need good people in your life.
Definitely the people. I think one of the beauties in science is that you can apply a lot of your techniques to a lot of different places. You can apply even your personal traits to a lot of different places, your ability to communicate with others. You can apply that anywhere. So whatever you end up doing, you're not married to that topic necessarily. You can do anything. People will make a very big difference in this sort of thing. Like I mentioned with the person who did the rapid decap in front of me, but like didn't tell me what was happening. That was day 3 of like a 10-week program in the summer. And so like, as soon as that happened, I was just like, oh no, it's gonna be a long summer. And it was, but that certainly made me learn, like, I thought the research was so cool. I was so excited to start it because I thought like, this is what I want to do. But then working with that person, I was like, maybe not. But then I learned about, it's about the person that you work with. Because for 2 weeks, that person was gone. I worked with another graduate student in the lab, and I was like, oh, this is great. Okay, cool. And I had experience in other labs where I just felt like, okay, this is my home. This is my home lab, And even in graduate school right now, one of my lab mates is also one of my best friends. And I was also very lucky that the members in WIN, we're spread across 2 different buildings, but it's always nice to just like walk in and be like, guys, the experiment didn't take. So I need somebody to hug me, when we could hug people. So if you can find that, do you see that the lab members get along? Is there a really nice camaraderie among them? Are there neighboring labs that are, coming over to say hi? Or is there this kind of, again, we mentioned before, like, is there this weird kind of animosity that you can sense? You can really sense it too, because you for these interviews, you go on like lunches and dinners and stuff, or Zoom calls now, and pay attention to body language. This will really make a difference. And we mentioned before, grad school is hard. Science can be hard, but having a support group really will make a difference in your experience.
I 1,000% agree with everything everybody's saying. People in your lab it's so important. I mean, I've had a very rough semester with all my experiments, but the people in my lab are so supportive, and my advisor is super supportive. And, I got that from the interviews process that I went through. And if I, didn't see that in the beginning, I definitely don't think I'd be still in this program. But, it's super important to have that support system within your lab, and even outside of your lab. If you have, your friends from your other cohorts in other labs, you support each other. And I definitely do that. And I have friends who do that with me too. And it's very important. I really, really want to emphasize that. So, but yeah.
Awesome. So that ends the submitted questions portion. We do have a few questions in the chat. And so it looks like we answered Violet's question of how did you guys select your programs? And then Cassie, I hope I'm saying that right, asked, did you find that the transition from being dependent on a mentor or manager, designing the experiments, to becoming independent was difficult? And before you guys answer that, I want to say that this kind of would also fit into an Ask Me Anything we're planning on having early in the next year, which is going to be Ask Me Anything Surviving Grad School, kind of like the complementary piece to this. So definitely we'll be sending information about that, but I just wanted to do a quick advertisement. But feel free to answer if anybody has anything to chime in with.
I do, if no one minds if I go first. For me, when I first started my master's program, my very first semester, I was heavily reliant on my PI to basically explain everything to me. I had no clue what I was doing. My first day, he was like, here, go do IHC. And I was like, do what? Like, I had no idea. IHC is immunohistochemistry, for those who don't know that. It's this type of experiment. I had no idea what I was talking about. And I found that gradually I've gotten to the point now where I'm starting my 3rd year where I go to him and he'll be like, so what do you want to do? And I'll be like, I'm gonna do this, this, and this. And he'll be like, you should do this. And I'll be like, no, that's not a good idea. We're gonna do this instead. Like it happened very naturally. I didn't even think about it. It was just like one day I started just like, oh, okay, well, like, here's my results. Well, obviously I have to do this next. Like, you don't even think about it. You just suddenly like one day you're just designing them and it happens very organically. So I wouldn't stress about like getting to a point where you're like, oh, okay, all of a sudden I'm on my own. Like, what do I do next? It'll just happen and you won't even think about it, just based on how your experience goes with your experiments, the things you learn in classes, and then just overall, the more you start reading scientific literature, the more you realize like, okay, well, they did this experiment. Obviously, this must be what they did next. Oh, great, that is what they do next, like so on and so forth. Science is really a story. That's all it is. You're telling a story. You started here, you found this, so you decided to tell this next. And as long as you kind of keep that story kind of process in your head, I think it'll happen really naturally.
I 100% agree. And I think for me, there was some sort of a switch that flipped after taking the qualifying exam. For most of you, I think most programs do it this way, where what, like a year or two, you're into your PhD program, you take this like qualifying exam. And I think each program does it differently. But for NGP at OHSU, you basically write an RSA or a training grant, essentially, where you're like designing this project with all these caveats and pitfalls, and it's a big thing. And then you defend in front of, or you present in front of this like committee, and the committee like asks you all these questions, and then they say you passed, and like it's like a whole process. But I think somewhere while preparing for that, I realized that most of the questions that I was asking weren't stupid. I was asking them because nobody really knew what was going on. And so once I started embracing the fact that asking questions isn't stupid, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and say it like way early in your PhD career than later, because it gets harder and harder to say, I don't know, older and older you get. So just kind of like embrace the fact that you are learning, embrace the fact that you don't know much. And then all of a sudden you kind of realize that you have developed into the scientist that you never thought you could develop into, and then you take ownership of your project. And like Kimberly was saying, your project, you know more about it than your PI could ever think about, because they have to manage like 8 different other projects and other grad students, but you have been taking this project from like its infancy to adulthood, and you just like take ownership of that. And it's like one of the best feelings in the world.
I was just going to say, in talking about being dependent on a mentor and then going to be independent, from another perspective, I was thinking about in my first year, I was used to being the undergrad. I was used to being the lab assistant. And then suddenly I have an undergraduate who's like, okay, what are we doing? And I'm like, you've been in this lab longer than I have. I don't know, you tell me. And it's just kind of this awkward, I don't even call it transition, like you're just kind of plopped. Like you have someone who's looking and asking you questions, have fun. And I remember at first, we ran the experiment, and then I went over the results with my advisor. My advisor was like, oh, did you share the results with your undergrad? And I was like, I should probably do that, as opposed to, now I try to keep my undergraduate assistants abreast of what's going on. Like, here's what we're planning to do. Here are the results. Talk about this. Not to say that I am, like I've mastered the art of mentoring, if I may say, or anything like that. It's just the transition of what you're cognizant of now. Like, okay, here's on my to-do list. Get the results. Talk about the results. Send them to everyone who was involved in the project, not just between me and my mentor. This is a group effort. And I like the analogy that we were saying before. It's like, it's kind of like it's a flip of a switch. You don't really even notice it happen until you're there. I'm sure I still have more growing to do, but it's kind of interesting to go and look back and like, oh, cool, all right, yeah, I'm getting the hang of it. I think so.
Okay, and we do have one other question. We did talk about how reaching out to potential advisors is really important for selecting a lab for graduate school. How long should that email be? If you have any recommendations, what to include in the email, how to start an introduction, any panelists can jump in.
I don't think it needs to be very long, maybe just like 5 or 6 sentences. I would just be like, dear X, Y, and Z, I am X, Y, and Z, and I work in this lab, or I'm an undergrad at this university studying X, Y, and Z. I was interested in your research, look at their website, make sure you know what they're doing and make it a little personal. Attach your CV or your resume that they may or may not look at, and then just be like, oh, I was wondering if we could set up a time to like chat, or I'm interested in applying to this program. I wanted to see what your thoughts were, something like that. I think is plenty, because I mean, I don't know about other people's PIs, but my PI barely reads like any emails, so it's shorter the better. They don't have a lot of attention span, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I agree. I want to build off on that a little bit. The part where like look up their website, like make sure you know what they actually do. Look up their publications, because I remember when I was an undergrad, I looked up a professor's webpage through the department on what he studied, and it says like personality. I'm like, sounds good. I want to study personality. He's like, yeah, I don't do that anymore. So make sure your sources are up to date. And I think what I found in researching, when I was going through graduate school application processes, a lot of faculty members will not update their pages or their bios, their pictures from 25 years ago. It's just not, it's not a viable source. So whatever you're looking at, sometimes people are really good about keeping their things up to date. Take a look at their papers that are recently published. That'll give you a good idea of what they're researching, because if someone's been there for decades, their research interests have shifted over years. So just make sure, because then don't do what I did and be like, I'm interested in this, and you're like, just kidding, we don't study that. So I still got into the lab, but I'm sure it didn't look good at first on my behalf. So learn from my mistake. Yeah, we have a question in the chat. Is it okay to ask if they are still focused on that research topic? Yeah, I think that's certainly fair. You can just say, I saw that you had published on this topic. I don't know if you're still interested in it. It's something I would be interested in pursuing. I think that's totally fine to ask. It's all about the approach. I think that's perfectly fine to ask. You're welcome.
Another thing is there's a website called NIH Reporter, where there's like anybody who's ever gotten an NIH grant is on there, so you can like look up if the PI has gotten a grant and what they have gotten the grant for, and that would probably be somewhere along the lines is what they are focused on right now. And that way you can also tell if they have the money to take you.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good stopping point for now. So thank you so much to everyone, both those in attendance and especially to our amazing panelists. We hope it's been both interesting and informative for everyone. So just a little bit of a promotion. Looking ahead, we have another event coming up December 9th. We're hosting a webinar on leading women in neuroscience and art. We have a few panelists in mind, but if you or anyone you know is a woman in neuroscience that creates art and would like to contribute to the conversation, please do let us know. We'll have additional details about this event on our social media pages, so keep checking in with us. And as Katie mentioned, after the new year, we're going to be hosting another Ask Me Anything, and it's the Surviving Grad School. So once you get all those acceptance letters, come back to us, and we will give you all the inside scoop on how to survive and thrive in your programs. And then last, we are going to send out a really short feedback survey within the next week or so we can make sure we're constantly improving and make sure that these webinars are what you want them to be, because after all, this group exists for you. So if you could please fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate it. And we want to thank you again so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you again soon. Bye, everyone.